$1,000 up front. But what Brendan did next showed how much of a wannabe gangster he was. He went shopping with the hitman. Brendan joined Gio and his crew on a trip to Kmart. They bought black shoes, pants and gloves, and windbreakers, as well as tarps for disposing of bodies.
Just like,
Brendan thought he
just wanted to be, he's that guy. He's that guy in the operation that's just like, I'm just happy to be here. Oh, you want to do that? Let's smoke that guy. Yo, let's take his stuff. What's up, guys? You know what's going on today. We got a fresh, brand new upload from the young homie Visual Venture. This nerdy kid became a $38 million drug lord. How did he do that? He probably had some crypto in there. I'm not gonna lie. But go ahead and like the video. Subscribe to me, Visual Venture, all that. You know what I'm saying? Let's get into it. No funny business.
We have a couple teenagers who trade pizza delivery for marijuana smuggling, and they ended up building a $60 million illegal business.
This couldn't be the Nate that I knew. I mean, he was a...
Honestly, that's a pipeline. I could have been in that pipeline. Me and a couple of my boys when we worked at Riverside Pizza. That's some deep lore, though.
Nerd. But sure enough, there he is, facing trial.
Clark and a friend started smuggling millions of dollars worth of pot from Canada into North Idaho.
And then all of a sudden, the world just changes, and you've got millions of dollars, and everyone wants to be your friend because they're attracted to the money and the power. It's like a crime teen dramedy thriller.
A teenager running a $38 million criminal empire sounds insane, but for Nate Norman, it was real life. Even crazier, most of his crew were also teenagers, and together they built one of the biggest smuggling operations in America. And through it all, these kids had one rule: don't let mom and dad find out. This is the crazy story of how a high school kid created a $38 billion drug empire. I'm Visual Venture, and you are awesome.
That's
the
a
last
good rule of
person
thumb.
you would expect. Nate Norman was the last person anyone would ever call a criminal mastermind, and there were three big reasons why. First, his age. Nate was only 19, still a teenager. Second, he had a reputation for being a really good kid, the kind of person that would go out of his way to help somebody. There was even a story about how Nate helped an old lady who lived across the street. Her driveway would get blocked every time the snowplow would go by, and Nate would always run over and shovel her driveway. But anytime the old lady offered him money, he turned it down. That's just who he was. The third reason Nate seemed harmless was where he grew up. Nate lived in a quiet lakeside city in Idaho. It looked like something off a postcard. It had spectacular mountains, clear lakes, and clean air. Life there was calm. Nothing about it screamed danger. In summary, Nate was a sweet, small-town kid with zero criminal tendencies. At least, that's how it seemed. But there was one thing about Nate that changed everything. One flaw that set him on the path to becoming a drug kingpin. He reportedly had a puppy dog need for approval, and that desperate need would send him down a dark path. Nate was never one of the popular kids. Friends described him as a fat, funny kid. He was one of those guys everybody used to pick on, and for Nate that stung. He wasn't book smart either. Nate struggled in class, and he eventually dropped out of high school. While his classmates planned for college, Nate got a job delivering pizza. But like most teenagers, Nate wanted to be cool. He wanted to be noticed and admired. Soon he figured out how. He realized that there was one thing that could make anyone a little more popular: weed. And for demonetization's sake, we're going to be referring to marijuana as grass. A lot of teens in this town smoke.
This for a like and comment and follow. Bruh. You know, drug dealing is one thing. I don't even like it. If it was just marijuana, fine, right? But like, if he's actually out here dealing hard drugs to people, like ruining people's lives, enabling people just for some likes, come on now.
Even though it was illegal, grass was always in demand, but it was hard to get. So anyone who had it instantly became more popular. Soon, Nate made sure he always had some to give away. According to one report, having grass gave Nate a quick way to earn the love, or at least tolerance, of his peers. And for a kid like Nate, that meant everything. But then Nate stumbled onto something bigger, something that could
We're doing all this to be tolerated, bro.
give him more than just popularity. It could give him money, power, and status. It was 2001. Back then, Nate spent his days delivering pizza and hanging out with his friends. One day, while with his friend Topher Clark, they came across a magazine. The cover story was about the booming marijuana industry in Canada. After reading the article, Nate summarized it this way: if you want good grass, go to the Canadian border with a backpack. Across the border, massive farms were producing some of the highest grade grass in the world. It was called BC Bud. In Canada, a pound of BC Bud cost about $1,400. But back in Idaho, that same pound sold for more than double the price. Nate and Topher immediately saw the opportunity. Buy cheap in Canada, bring it back across the border, sell it high in Idaho, repeat. The numbers were appealing. Law enforcement estimated the sale of BC Bud is a $7 billion a year industry. That meant there was so much money to be made. Nate checked a map. The Canadian border was so close, just a few hours away from their town. But there was just one problem. How could they smuggle pot across the border without getting caught? The border between the United States and Canada is the longest international border in the world. There are official checkpoints where officers inspect every person and every vehicle. They check passports, search cars, and stop anything illegal from getting through. Getting caught smuggling meant years in prison. But people still did it. Experienced smugglers hid pot in buses, mobile homes, and even horse trailers. They packed it so well that officers missed it during inspection. Some smugglers even went
out here hiding.
Dug a 360-foot underground tunnel to move pot across the border. Others used kayaks to slip
underground
through
pot
waterways.
roads.
Some even flew small planes over the border. With these kids, Nate and Topher didn't have those resources. Their only option was to hike through the woods. In certain areas, the border cuts through forests, lakes, and mountains, making it impossible to monitor every inch. Nate and Topher figured they could hike the 7-mile border crossing through the forest on foot. It was risky. The terrain was rough. The wilderness was unpredictable. There were wild animals in the woods, but they were willing to risk everything, even their lives, to make it happen. The crossing.
Kind of respect
Nate and Topher scraped together every dollar they could find. Between odd jobs, borrowed cash, and savings, they pulled together $1,500. They drove up to Creston, a small farming town near the Canadian border. Then they headed to a local bar searching for a dealer. Within hours, they found one. The boys paid $1,400 for a pound of BC Bud. Then they stuffed it into a backpack and left. That was easy. The hard part was getting it across the border without getting caught. Their plan was straightforward. Nate would drive back across the border acting like a normal traveler. Meanwhile, Topher would hike 7...
I do not do drugs, nor do I condone all the drug-related activities that are adjacent to them. You know, I don't mind people smoking weed and stuff. It's their life. They can do what they want. But I personally will not be doing that.
Miles through the woods carrying the product in his backpack. It sounded simple, but it wasn't. There were grizzly bears and mountain lions in those woods, and a wrong turn could get you lost for days. If Topher didn't make it back before nightfall, you could freeze, get lost, or run straight into predators. Still, they went through it. The journey began hour after hour. Topher pushed forward through the woods. Finally, he made it to the other side safely. Nate was waiting to meet him.
Topher better cover his toes in fur.
The impossible was possible. It was terrifying, risky, and dumb, but it worked. And now they wanted to do it again. Back home, Nate and Topher sold the entire pound in a couple of hours. They doubled their money. The speed of that first sale made one thing clear. Demand was high. And now Nate and Topher had the supply, so they went back. This time they bought 2 pounds. It sold out instantly. Within weeks, Nate and Topher were making regular runs, a few pounds at a time. Each crossing was equally dangerous, but every success made them bolder. At first, they sold only to friends and acquaintances. Even on that small scale, they doubled, sometimes tripled their profits. Soon, they were making 20 or 30 grand a week for a 19-year-old high school.
That's insane. Yeah, his perception of money is cooked forever. But like, yo, you gotta think about that. The one thing about the drug game is like the margins are always really good because you can charge whatever you want because people just, it's not necessarily like a necessity. It's like more of like a luxury good, and it's not even like a luxury good. It's like a destructive luxury good. So it's like people will pay even more for that for some psychological reason. I'm not sure, but a lot of addictive reasons as well. When people get addicted to it and stuff, they're gonna pay whatever. They're gonna steal it. They're gonna get it. They're gonna get it in blood. They're gonna do whatever they gotta do. But the one thing about like the drug industry that sucks is that everything is so cheap to produce because they cut corners everywhere. They don't use like natural stuff a lot of the times, and they try to like fill in and lace stuff, and they just use like the cheapest materials, like with fentanyl and all that. If you didn't watch that fentanyl video that we did about discovering fentanyl, I don't even think I uploaded it yet. Never mind. So, but yeah, check out that video if you want to know. But that stuff is no bueno.
Dropout or anyone at all, it was life-changing money, but it wasn't enough.
For sure.
Nate had a target. His plan was to make $3 million and get out. But success has a way of changing plans. Making all that money gave Nate something he never had before. Soon, he didn't want to stop at $3 million. He wanted to build an empire. Nate and Topher realized they couldn't keep doing everything themselves. So Nate turned to the only people he trusted, friends and old classmates. Within months, Nate had a crew. None of them were hardened criminals. Most never broke the law before, but they all wanted easy money. When their operation was at its height, it included at least 32 people. Topher was in charge of the new recruits. He led them on the 7-mile hike.
Bro made a cartel, bro. Like a mini cartel.
Through the woods. But now that they had money, they upgraded. They bought new boots to make the trek easier, night vision goggles to see in the dark, camouflage gear to blend into the forest, first aid kits, bear spray. They even bought a spray that was supposed to make them invisible to heat sensors. The system was simple. The crew crossed the border 6 at a time, carrying bags filled with cash. Sometimes they carried as much as $400,000 in a single trip. In Canada, they would exchange the money for product. Then they would hike back through the woods with backpacks full of pot. Cash went one way, product came back. But it never stopped being dangerous. One time, the crew got lost in the woods and nearly froze to death. Luckily, no one got seriously hurt, so they kept going. They even started enjoying the trips. Nate sometimes joined them. He later said the adrenaline rush of walking in the woods at night. The thrill is addicting. Soon, Nate was supplying entire dealer networks across Idaho. The crew was flush with cash. Then they
approval junkies.
They hit a new
dangerous drug right there, especially now in the age of social media.
Problem. Although they were making millions, they couldn't spend it freely. Almost everyone involved was in their teens and early 20s. Most still were living with their moms. They didn't want their parents finding out what they were doing. Flashing sudden wealth would raise suspicion. Cops could even start asking questions. After risking their lives and freedom, the kids were rich.
They really didn't think that through, right? What are they gonna do with all that money? If they don't go and invest it, I don't think they can. Yet, until they reach a certain age, they can create their accounts and stuff. But like, what are they gonna do with that? How are they supposed to wash that money or like clean that money? Like, are they supposed to just believe that like, yo, the pizza delivery just suddenly started putting up big numbers? Like, it's probably better that way, honestly, that they don't spend it, that they couldn't spend it because they won't spend it. But I don't know why I'm rooting for these guys, but
trapped. That's when Nate's puppy dog need for approval kicked in again. Nate didn't just want the money. He wanted respect. And now that he was rich, he thought he could buy it. So Nate started spending. His friends followed suit. And from there, things got out of control fast. Young, wild, and rich. When they started spending, Nate and his friends didn't hold back. They bought 4-wheelers, jet skis, and gold jewelry. They also threw massive parties that every kid in town heard about. But their biggest splurge and the hardest thing to hide was on enormous lakefront homes. Some of them bought, others rented, but these weren't ordinary houses. They were mansions. Nate's place had 8 bedrooms and an indoor swimming pool. Overnight, Nate and his crew became the coolest kids in town. Maybe Nate was enjoying his newfound popularity too much, because soon he came up with a ridiculous idea. He wanted to look like a kingpin. People said Nate started acting like Tony Montana from the movie Scarface. Scarface is one of the most iconic films ever made.
He's like, huh? You think I'm stupid, huh?
It follows a Cuban immigrant, Tony Montana, who builds a massive criminal empire in Miami. Tony Montana became the blueprint for wannabe drug lords everywhere. He wore flashy suits and gold chains. He carried firearms constantly. He spoke with a distinct accent. Nate was reportedly inspired by that. So Nate started talking with an accent, copying Montana's swagger. People said he became cocky and disrespectful. Nate also bought several firearms, including an automatic one. He even started dating a stripper 7 years older than him. Topher, Nate's partner from the very beginning, watched the transfer. Sebo bought several firearms, including an automatic one. He even started dating a stripper 7 years older than him. Topher, Nate's partner from the very beginning, watched the transformation unfold. Topher described it this way. Nate went from having this humble personality to thinking he was this badass smuggler no one could touch. He would drive around town with his 24-inch rims and
moving Korribans to Korriban.
diamond chain.
Hey, shout out if you got that ball knowledge, all my Star Wars fans, bro. Shout out to you. Hey, if you know that reference, put it in the comments.
Listening to hardcore rap, just this perfect drug dealer image, and people were starting to fear him because he had power and money. Nate wasn't the same person anymore, and Nate wasn't just playing a part. He started using substances, particularly white powder. It wasn't surprising because Tony Montana from Scarface did the same, but the substances made Nate paranoid, and now that he had weapons, it also made him dangerous. There's one story that shows just how dangerous. One night, Nate and his crew threw a huge party. Over 100 people packed the house. Everyone was drinking, dancing, and having fun. Then a fight broke out over a girl. The place erupted. People were yelling, shoving, and screaming. In the chaos, Nate grabbed one of his biggest weapons and shot it off in the house. Someone who was there said it sounded like a bomb went off.
In your own crib? You're letting it rock in your own crib. You're gonna let it go. That's crazy.
Everyone ran out of the party screaming. That was the new Nate. Nate the Kingpin. Meanwhile, Topher was becoming anxious. He wanted to quit the business. After all, he already made enough to live comfortably. But when he told Nate he wanted out, Nate refused. Remember, Topher was the one who trained the
Nate probably like, you're my bread and butter. You can't leave.
runners. He was the one keeping the product moving safely through the woods. Nate couldn't afford to lose him, so he offered Topher more money to stay. Topher reluctantly agreed, but deep down, Topher knew something bad was coming. He told him,
yeah, bro, that's your guy, bro. Like, at this point, I thought y'all were friends, right? Shouldn't you, like, tell your mans, be like, I know he's not trying to hear all that right now because he's young and he just got a little taste of, like, the high life, right? Quote unquote high life, what he perceives as. And, like, he's not trying to hear any of that calm down, be humble shit. He's just on his complete and utter bullshit right now. So, he's got a tough one trying to leave on his hands.
this is going to have a horrible ending. He had no idea how right he was. Nate and his crew thought the cops were their biggest problem. They were wrong. Other smuggling crews were watching them closely. To them, Nate and his boys weren't just kids. They were competition. And in this business, competition was deadly. Ruthless rivals. Just a few miles away, another young smuggler was making moves. His name was Brendan Butler. Brendan was only 20, close to Nate's age, and he ran his own grass operation in the same area as Nate. One article described Brendan as Nate's most serious rival. Brendan was very different than Nate. Nate was a high school dropout, but Brendan graduated with honors from a private prep school. Nate wasn't book smart, but Brendan excelled in school. Nate grew up in a working class family, but Brendan's parents were wealthy. Despite their differences, they had one thing in common. They both wanted to look tough. We've already seen how Nate modeled himself.
That's a dangerous game, boy. All that over some ego, bro. But I already know how it is. Y'all should already know how it is when it comes to stuff like this. Like, once you get up to that level, I feel like people just ego ball more than they should. They just wanted to look like, hey, I'm that guy. I mean, and to a degree, you kind of have to, so people don't try to punk you and take advantage of you, but still.
After Tony Montana. Brendan also created his own gangster persona. He drove around town with a low-riding 93 Eldorado with tinted windows and tricked-out rims. He used substances and acted the part. At first, the two stayed out of each other's way. Nate had his buyers, Brendan had his. But as Nate's business grew, their worlds collided. They were chasing the same customers, fighting for the same suppliers, and moving into each other's territories. Arguments turned into confrontations. Confrontations turned into threats. But Brendan wasn't making idle threats. It became personal for him. He began to hate Nate. Soon, Brendan Butler decided to do the unthinkable. He wanted to end Nate for good. By early 2002, Brendan started looking for a hitman. He found a man named Giovanni, also known as Gio. Gio wasn't a professional killer.
I know, this comment is gonna be lost on this video because these guys are so young and so like just inexperienced with life and everything. But this is what always gets people, the greed, bro. I'm perfectly sure that their operations independently, even with the competition, are running perfectly fine. They're making perfectly enough money to actually, like, they're making more than enough money, way more than enough money to do everything they need to do and still eat good. But this, like, little eye for greed that they had, they're like, I gotta take out the other guy so I can eat, you know? But it's just dumb. It's just unnecessary. And ego, too, bro.
He was a graphic artist who did hits as a side hustle. Gio recruited 2 friends to help him. He was a graphic artist who did hits as a side hustle. Gio recruited.
That's insane. What? How do you? That's a crazy combo, bro. Graphic artist and hitman. Yo, they would have never. He's low key though. He's low key. They're not catching him. What if he draws like all his victims like caricatures and stuff when he like smokes their pack? He just draws them first before and then draws them after, like being sad and stuff. That is crazy.
2 friends to help him with the job. Brendan's orders were clear. He wanted them to rob Nate and then end him. Brendan believed that taking Nate out would collapse the entire operation. The hitmen agreed to do the job for $100,000. Brendan gave them $5,000 up front. But what Brendan did next showed how much of a wannabe gangster he was. He went shopping with the hitman. Brendan joined Gio and his crew on a trip to Kmart. They bought black shoes, pants and gloves, and windbreakers, as well as tarps for disposing of bodies.
He just like
Brendan thought he
just wanted to be. He's that guy. He's that guy in the operation that's just like, I'm just happy to be here. Oh, you want to do that? Let's smoke that guy. Yo, let's take his stuff. He's that guy egging everybody on, trying to be a badass, but he's low key just happy to be here. Bro, you cannot be the head of the organization moving like that. Not that I'm rooting for this guy. Honestly, I hope he does get time on his head.
running the show. He even gave the crew tools for the job, but his plan was about to fall apart. It would become one of the worst fumbles in assassination history. In June 2002, the hitmen made their move. That same night, Brendan hosted a big alibi party so he couldn't be implicated.
Alibi
it could be used
party
as
is
evidence
crazy.
that he was somewhere else when the incident took place. Miles away, the hitmen broke into the home of one of Nate's close allies, a guy called Scuzz. They robbed Scuzz and then let him go. Afterward, they went straight to Brendan and split the stolen cash. It was a catastrophic mistake. By robbing Nate's ally, they tipped off Nate's entire crew. Everyone now knew someone was coming after them, and that's exactly what happened. When Nate heard about the robbery, he became paranoid. He didn't know who was behind it, but his operation went on high alert. Getting close to him became nearly impossible, and that's when everything flipped. Brendan started fighting with his own hitman. Brendan still owed Gio $95,000 of the $100,000 for the hit, but he refused to pay until the job was done. But now Nate's crew was on edge, so getting to him was almost impossible. The job couldn't be done. Brendan
honestly,
kept
bro's got like, at this point, I'm pretty sure bro's making enough money to pay the guy. Especially, I'm just like forget the whole like, I hate to say this, but it's always with these type of videos, I always got to look at it from like a strictly business perspective, because obviously this is like morally terrible and I would never condone or support any of this stuff that they're doing. But from a business perspective, right, if you have competition and you are expecting to take out said competition, right, look at it like this, right? Like, bro, they said they were making in the beginning of their operation like what, 30K a week, right? So like you take like a month's worth of profit, right? Obviously you got to pay people and stuff like that. If that was in the beginning of the operation, they're probably making way more now. But still, like, if you hypothetically take around a month's worth of profit and put it into taking out your competition, you're going to make that back instantly once he's gone if the hitman does his job. And if not, you're going to make it back still. So, like, what are we doing? But then again, these guys are young, they're dumb, but like, they're like ego filled and stuff. I don't want it to go well for them, but I'm just saying, if you're gonna be a drug lord, at least be smart about it.
feeding the hitmen information about Nate and his crew. But much of it turned out to be wrong information.
None of y'all listen to this, go out there and be a juggler. Don't take any of the advice that I said. You can apply this to other business though, but don't take any of the advice I'm saying and use that junk to harm people. That's not why I'm spitting this knowledge right now.
Every failed attempt made them angrier. The tension built for months. Brendan and the hitmen argued constantly. By October 2002, everything boiled over. Brendan arranged to meet the hitmen in a remote campsite. He brought them there to show the men a remote location to dispose of the bodies. But at the meeting, they argued about money. According to police reports, Brendan's wannabe gangster persona apparently rubbed the group of actual gangsters the wrong way. Gio snapped. He got physical with Brendan and ended him on the spot. In a cruel twist of fate, Brendan Butler, Nate's biggest rival, was taken out by the very hitmen he hired to attack Nate. They dragged his body into the woods and left him beneath the trees. For almost a month, no one knew what happened to Brendan. His wealthy parents launched an all-out search. Then a woodcutter stumbled across his remains deep in the woods. The discovery shocked the entire town. Police launched a homicide investigation. They combed through Brendan's phone records and messages. That's when they found the hitman's number. Gio was now a suspect. Police arrested Gio and his crew in March 2003, about 5 months after the crime. The hitmen confessed. They told investigators everything. Brendan's pot operation, his rivalry with Nate, and the failed assassination plot. All the secrets were out. Police already noticed the surge of Canadian grass flowing into Idaho. Now there was a body on the ground. This wasn't a small town smuggling anymore. It was organized crime. And with Brendan gone, Nate was now the undisputed kingpin. If police could bring him down, they could choke off the entire supply chain. From that moment, Nate had a massive target on his back.
They had to regulate.
Pressure from all sides. In mid-2003, Nate's empire looked unstoppable on paper, but in reality, it was falling apart. After Brendan's demise, law enforcement turned up the heat. Police began running surveillance on Nate's crew. Even the FBI got involved. The cops wanted more. All they needed was proof. Agents followed cars. Phones were tapped. Stash houses were mapped. Nate and his guys were shaken. Not just because of the police, but
the police said, regulators! It was a clear black night. I gotta laugh away from the mic so it doesn't peak.
Mainly because of how Brendan lost his life. For the first time, Nate understood just how deep he was in. He realized this wasn't just kids smuggling grass anymore. They were in a world of hitmen, revenge, and violent rivals.
3 years.
And now the cops were watching everything. Most of Nate's network was made up of young teenagers. They weren't built for this kind of pressure. By April 2003, Nate and his crew made a decision. Get out while they still could. They had millions of dollars stashed away. If they moved fast, they could disappear. One of the boys rented a U-Haul and drove it to the mansion to start packing. What they didn't realize was the cops were surveilling almost every house tied to Nate's crew. When they spotted the U-Haul, they knew what was happening. The kids were about to run. They couldn't let that happen. Police raided the house. They seized weapons, cash, grass, and computers. Everyone there was arrested, but Nate and Topher weren't there. Under interrogation, the crew broke instantly. Everyone told on everyone. Some even became informants. And thanks to the information they gave up, investigators...
The neighborhood reputable? Yo. Everyone started squealing, boy. They got no street cred. That's how you know. But they didn't never have any to start with. Like, we know how this started. It said, like, it was the nerdy kid and, like, he brought on his friends. Bro, they were not made for this. And I'm glad that they weren't made for this because they don't need to be involved in this stuff. It doesn't even really need to be perpetuated at all. But that's crazy, bro. The neighborhood reputable
built a much bigger case. By November 2003, police struck again. In one sweep, they made 14 arrests, including Scuzz, Topher, and others. They even arrested Nate's stripper girlfriend, Buffy, but one name was still missing, Nate Norman. With most of his crew behind bars, Nate disappeared. He was on the run for several months, but he couldn't run forever. Eventually, Nate turned himself in. When police finally met Nate face to face, they were stunned. A reporter described the reaction investigation. They were like, this is the guy who orchestrated a multi-million-dollar operation, and he looks like and has the job skills of a pizza delivery boy, but it wasn't truly over. Not yet. Nate surrendering didn't mean giving up. He hired expensive lawyers to fight the case. The multi-million-dollar kid kingpin was about to go head-to-head with federal prosecutors. The big question was, could Nate actually get out of this? Kingpin in court.
Is he about to take
Nate was 21 when he went to court in 2004. The prosecution came down hard. Nate wasn't treated like a kid who made bad choices. He was portrayed as the kingpin of a drug empire. If Nate lost the case, he was facing 10 to 12 years behind bars. Prosecutors accused Nate's crew of smuggling.
That's crazy because I could swear that a certain demographic of people get more time than that for just having possession of some. But hey, what do I know about the American justice system? Wait, this is technically in Canada, isn't it?
$38 million worth of grass. But no, the evidence was overwhelming.
They went to Canada, right? And then they brought it back to Idaho. That's what happened, right?
Bank records, pounds of seized product, and recorded conversations with the crew. But it got worse. Multiple members of Nate's own crew testified against him in exchange for lighter sentences. With the case stacked against him, Nate had no way out. He took a deal pleading guilty to 5 of the 59 counts against him. Even with the deal, he knew he was trading his freedom for years behind bars. The judge sentenced him to 12 years in prison. He would not be eligible for parole until he served at least 10 years. Nate filed an appeal to get a reduced sentence. It was rejected. Most of Nate's crew got much lighter sentences. Scuzz and Topher each received 30 months. The rest got between 30 and 46 months. Gio, the hitman who ended Brendan Butler, also pleaded guilty. He was handed a life sentence with a possibility of parole in 8 years. It was a sad end to a crazy story. But Nate's fame didn't disappear behind bars. If anything, his story got bigger. While serving his sentence, Nate Norman became popular online. People were fascinated by how a small-town pizza delivery boy built a multi-million-dollar smuggling empire. They made documentaries, blogs, and podcasts dissecting his rise and fall. That fascination eventually reached Hollywood. In 2014, filmmakers released a movie based on Nate's story. It was titled Kid Canvas. It turned Nate into a cultural icon. By then, Nate was free to watch it himself, because in December 2013, Nate was released. This photo was taken by his parents when he came out of prison. Today, Nate owns a heating, ventilation, and air conditioning business and has a family. But the story didn't end well for Topher, Nate's partner, the guy who helped them since the very first run. In 2019, Topher got into a fight at a bar. Things got physical. The other man pulled out a weapon. Topher lost his life.
Everyone is just shocked by Clark's death. He was well known, especially in North Idaho.
Nate Norman thought money would make people love him, and it worked for a while. But when you're only loved for what you have, you'll be alone when you lose it. Visual Venture.
Hey, Visual Venture.
If you thought
dope. That was a good little video. That was a good little point at the end too. When you're only loved for what you have, you'll be alone when you lose it. Dang. With that being said, let me know what y'all think about the video. Go ahead and like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you think about that last comment too, especially. Have y'all ever dealt drugs? Don't say that online. If you have, just make better life choices, honestly. But that's gonna be it for me. So hope you guys enjoyed it. There'll be more later. So bye.